Well, good morning. Today is Saturday, April 11th, and welcome to our daily devotional for today. And as we begin, I just want to invite you to be mindful of how you've seen God at work in the last 24 hours. What has brought you towards peace, joy, love, and for what can you be thankful this morning? So let's begin reflecting on that as we start our time of prayer. Well, today is an interesting day in the calendar of the church. It's often called Holy Saturday, and it's really a waiting day in between the momentous events of Good Friday and Easter Sunday. It's a day that is marked almost by its emptiness or absence. And yet there's something profound that happens where we can encounter God, even on a day like today. And our scripture for this morning is, we'll just read one verse, because there's really not much in the story of Jesus that talks about this day at all. But I'd like to read one verse. It's John chapter 20, verse 19, and it sets the tone for the day. When therefore it was evening, on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." Let's read it one more time. When therefore it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came in and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." What stands out to you about that passage? It says the doors were shut for fear of the Jews. This passage is referring to Sunday morning Easter, or actually Sunday evening, but it's clear the doors have been shut since Friday night. And the disciples, for fear of authorities, the Jews and the Romans perhaps, were behind locked doors, afraid. Many of us have been behind locked doors for some time now with this shelter-in-place order. Some of us have been extremely busy, but many of us, it's been something else. How has this season of waiting, of being behind locked doors, been for you? Our text for this morning talks about the fear that the disciples had. Certainly fear, in both of its forms, appropriate caution, but also unregulated fear is a feature of our society today. If you're experiencing fear, what are you afraid of in this season? And what other emotions are being stirred up for you during this season of sheltering in place, this time of waiting behind locked doors? certainly one of the other strongest emotions, strongest, most compelling things going on in the room for the disciples on that Saturday would have been disappointment. For them, they would have anticipated Jesus being crowned king, and here instead they've laid him in a tomb. What hopes, what plans, what expectations have you had to lay to rest, to put aside? What disappointments have come to sit with you in these past few weeks? You know, perhaps, I wonder what we think of the scene that the disciples had while they were with each other in that room. Perhaps they wondered how Judas was because he wasn't there and they didn't know what had happened to him. And they couldn't, they couldn't text to find out. Perhaps they were wondering what was going on outside. And maybe we think of them as just like sitting around hand-wringing and fretting, or, I don't know, playing Xbox all day. I'm not sure. But that Saturday would have been a Sabbath day for them, a day filled with its own rhythms and routines, ways of remembering their story, of ways of remembering and sort of rhythms to encounter God. In this season of sheltering in place, even this particular day, what rhythms and practices can you engage in to help you encounter God and remember your story? How's that been for you? Let's read our passage one more time. When therefore it was evening on the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said, "Peace be with you." Of course, this passage, this verse is anticipating tomorrow's wonder and joy. But even today, we can encounter God. Jesus comes and stands in our midst, even on this Holy Saturday, and speaks peace. Why don't we now gather together our thoughts and our feelings and our prayers, and just talk to Jesus about them as we might talk to a friend as we prepare to close. May peace be with you today, friend.